I never thought my sister-in-law would be stupid enough to steal from me. But standing there in my parents' living room, watching Claire wave those papers around like a trophy, I realized stupidity wasn't the issue. Arrogance was. She actually thought she'd won. The documents she was flaunting, my savings account statements, my wedding fund that I'd spent 3 years building, were clutched in her manicured fingers like some kind of victory banner. My parents were beaming at her, nodding along as she explained how she discovered this money and decided it would be so much better used for her daughter Ashley's wedding next month. And me? I was standing there with my phone in my pocket, finger hovering over a number I'd saved 2 weeks ago. A number that would change everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to where this nightmare actually started, because the theft wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment everything came crashing into the light. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you're genuinely enjoying the story. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Enjoy watching. 3 months earlier, I noticed something off about my mail. Nothing dramatic, just small things. A bank statement arriving opened. A letter from my financial advisor that looked like it had been carefully resealed. I'm detail-oriented by nature, probably comes from working as a research analyst, so these irregularities stuck out to me like red flags. At first, I thought maybe the postal service was having issues. But then I started testing. I'd place a tiny piece of tape in specific spots on my important envelopes before they went into my home mailbox. When they came back disturbed, I knew someone was going through my mail. Someone who had access to my parents' house, where I was temporarily staying while my apartment underwent massive renovations after a pipe burst. The list of suspects was short. My parents wouldn't invade my privacy like that. My younger brother Jake was deployed overseas. That left Claire, Jake's wife, who had her own key and stopped by constantly to check on my elderly parents. Except my parents didn't need checking on. They were active, healthy in their early 60s. Claire's visits were about something else entirely. I just didn't know what yet. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I set up a tiny camera in my room, angled at my desk where I kept my mail. Completely legal since it was my private space. And I waited. It took less than a week. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. There was Claire, letting herself into my room with a key I definitely never gave her. She made a beeline for my desk, rifled through the stack of mail I'd deliberately left there, and started photographing documents with her phone. Bank statements. Investment accounts. The savings fund I'd earmarked for my wedding to Marcus, my fiancé of 2 years. She spent almost 20 minutes in my room, methodically documenting my financial life. When she left, she carefully rearranged everything exactly as it had been. Almost perfectly. But not quite. Because I'd placed everything at specific angles, and she was off by millimeters. Now here's where most people would have confronted her immediately. Screamed, caused a scene, called the police right then. But I'm not most people. I spent my entire career analyzing patterns, predicting behavior, understanding how systems work. And I knew that if Claire was going through this much trouble to catalog my finances, she wasn't just curious.
She was planning something.
So, I made a choice that probably sounds insane. I let her keep going. I kept that camera running. I watched her come back 3 more times over the next month, each visit more brazen than the last. She started photographing documents from my closet, my filing cabinet, even my laptop screen when I'd left it open. She was building a complete picture of everything I owned. But I was building something too. I was documenting every single invasion. Time-stamped, high-definition video of her illegal activities. And I was making phone calls. See, when you work in financial analysis, you make connections. You network with people in various government agencies. You learn who to call when something feels wrong. One of my former colleagues had moved to the Treasury Department, working in financial crimes. We'd kept in touch. And when I explained what was happening, not the family drama, but the systematic documentation of my finances by someone with fraudulent intent, she got very interested. Very interested. Maya, she told me on that call, what you're describing isn't just theft. If she's planning what I think she's planning, this could be identity fraud, financial exploitation, potentially even money laundering if she's moving your funds through accounts.
Keep documenting.
Get me everything. And when she makes her move, call me immediately.
So I did.
I documented everything. I also did something else that might seem paranoid, but turned out to be genius. I moved the bulk of my savings into a new account Claire didn't know about. I left just enough in the original account to make it look real, to make it look worth stealing. Because by this point I knew she was going to steal it. The question wasn't if. It was when and how. And I wanted to control that moment. I wanted to choose the battlefield. The opportunity came when my parents announced they were hosting a family dinner. Claire immediately volunteered to help set up. Of course she did. Because family dinners meant everyone would be together. Witnesses. An audience for whatever she had planned. I showed up early, watched her moving through the house with that fake smile she always wore. She'd gotten better at pretending over the years. When she married Jake, I thought she was just socially awkward. Now I understood, she wasn't awkward. She was calculating. Every smile, every kind gesture, every just checking on you, sweetie, was a move in a game she'd been playing for years. Dinner started normally enough. My parents talking about their garden. Claire gushing about Ashley's upcoming wedding, how expensive everything was, how they were struggling to cover costs. This was the setup. I could feel it coming. She kept glancing at me, waiting for something. And then, right as dessert was being served, she stood up, cleared her throat, pulled those papers out of her purse. My bank statements. My savings account information. Documents she had no legal right to possess. I have something wonderful to share, she announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I found Maya's little savings account. She's been hoarding all this money while watching our family struggle. But don't worry, I've already started the transfer process. This money is going to pay for Ashley's wedding, where it'll actually be appreciated. The room went silent. My father looked confused. My mother looked between Claire and me, uncertainty crossing her face. And Claire? Claire looked triumphant. She actually thought she'd won. She thought that by framing this as family helping family, by presenting it in front of my parents, she'd force me to go along with it. That I'd be too embarrassed or too pressured to fight back. She'd miscalculated.
Badly.
That's interesting, I said calmly, pulling out my phone. Because that account you're talking about? I closed it 2 months ago. The money you're claiming to transfer doesn't exist in that account anymore. Her smile faltered. Just for a second. But she recovered quickly. Don't lie, Maya. I have the statements right here. I know exactly how much is in there. Those statements are from 3 months ago. They're also documents you obtained illegally by repeatedly breaking into my room and photographing my private financial information. I held up my phone, showing the paused video of her rifling through my desk. I have footage of every single time you violated my privacy. Would you like to see? The color drained from her face. My parents looked horrified. At her, not at me. But Claire wasn't done. She never knew when to quit. This is absurd. Those are family documents. I was just trying to help. And even if the money moved, I know you have it somewhere. You're going to contribute to Ashley's wedding whether you like it or not. That's when I made the call. Not to a lawyer. Not to the police. To my contact at the Treasury Department. It's happening, I said simply. The address is 2847 Maple Drive. Claire laughed. Actually laughed. Who are you calling? Your imaginary boyfriend? This is pathetic, Maya. I'm calling the United States Treasury Department. Specifically, their Financial Crimes Division. Because what you've done isn't just family drama. It's federal crime. The laughter died. I could see her brain working, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. But here's the thing about working in financial analysis. You learn to keep detailed records. You learn to document everything. And you learn exactly which laws apply to which situations. Claire had committed multiple felonies. Breaking and entering. Identity theft. Attempted financial fraud. And because she tried to move money across state lines, Ashley's wedding was in California, she'd actually set up federal charges. The doorbell rang 18 minutes later. I know because I was counting. Treasury agents don't mess around. They don't show up alone, and they don't show up unprepared. Four agents in dark suits entered my parents' living room, badges out, expression serious. The lead agent, a woman named Sarah Chen, walked directly to Claire. Claire Mitchell? We need you to come with us. We have questions about illegal access to financial accounts and attempted wire fraud. Claire's face went from pale to ghost white. She looked at my parents, expecting them to defend her. But my father was staring at the agents, my mother's hand covering her mouth in shock. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't family drama. This was federal agents in their living room, taking their daughter-in-law away for questioning. This is insane, Claire stammered. Maya's lying. She's making this up because she's jealous of Ashley's wedding. She's always been jealous of my family. Agent Chen pulled out a tablet, turning it to face Claire. We have surveillance footage, financial records, and documentation of 4 separate illegal entries into Ms. Thompson's private residence. We have evidence of you photographing confidential financial documents without permission. And we have proof that you attempted to initiate unauthorized transfers from accounts that don't belong to you. This isn't about jealousy. This is about crimes you committed. The next part happened fast. Claire was read her rights, handcuffed, and escorted out while my parents stood frozen in their doorway. My mother was crying. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. And me? I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Because this wasn't just about the money. It was about every time Claire had manipulated my family. Every time she'd played the victim. Every time she'd twisted situations to make herself look good while making others look bad. After they left, my parents turned to me. Maya, my father said quietly, did you really need to call federal agents? We could have handled this as a family. This is the moment I'd been dreading. Because I knew my parents. They were conflict avoiders. They wanted peace at any cost. And I was about to shatter their illusion of family harmony forever. Dad, this stopped being a family matter the moment she committed federal crimes. She didn't borrow money and forget to return it. She systematically invaded my privacy, documented my finances, and attempted to steal tens of thousands of dollars. And you want to know what the worst part is? She's done this before. My mother's head snapped up.
What?
I pulled out my laptop, opening files I'd compiled over the last 2 months. Remember when Grandma's jewelry went missing 3 years ago? The pieces she'd specifically left to me in her will? I found photos of them on Claire's Instagram. She's wearing Grandma's sapphire ring in a photo from Ashley's Sweet 16. Remember when Uncle Tom's identity was stolen and someone opened credit cards in his name? That happened right after Claire visited him to help organize his paperwork when he was recovering from surgery. Remember the issue with Jake's disability pay getting redirected? Claire had access to his military accounts. I watched my parents' faces as the pattern emerged. Individual incidents they'd explained away as coincidences or mistakes suddenly forming a clear picture. Claire hadn't just targeted me. She'd been systematically exploiting family members for years. She just picked victims carefully: elderly relatives, deployed soldiers, people who wouldn't immediately notice or fight back. I'd been different. I'd been paying attention. I spent 2 months investigating. I continued. I contacted everyone she'd had extended access to. Uncle Tom confirmed his documents were photographed by Claire before the identity theft. Grandma's estate lawyer confirmed Claire was present when those jewelry pieces mysteriously vanished during the estate settlement. Jake's military advocate found irregularities in account access that trace back to Claire's devices. This isn't a one-time mistake. This is a pattern of criminal behavior. My father sat down heavily. Why didn't anyone say anything? Because she's good at choosing victims who won't speak up. And because she always had plausible deniability. She was just helping. Just organizing. Just being supportive. But I'm a financial analyst, Dad. I recognize patterns. And I refuse to be another victim on her list. The room was silent for a long moment. Then my mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens now?
Now?
The Treasury Department investigates. They'll likely find evidence of multiple crimes across several years. Claire will probably face federal charges. And Jake. I paused, thinking about my brother overseas, completely unaware his wife was being arrested. Jake needs to know the truth. Calling Jake was the hardest part. He was 7 time zones away, dealing with his own stress, and I had to tell him his wife of 8 years was a criminal. But he deserved to know. When I finally reached him 2 days later, after Claire had been formally charged, I laid out everything. The evidence. The pattern. The federal investigation. He was silent for so long I thought the connection had dropped. Jake. I said finally. Are you there? I'm here, he said quietly. I'm just thinking about all the times money went missing from our accounts and she blamed it on banking errors. All the times she said she was helping family members. I didn't want to believe she was capable of this. But Maya, I think I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to see it. That conversation lasted 3 hours. We talked about warning signs he'd ignored, explanations he'd accepted without questioning, the way Claire had isolated him from family and friends over the years. By the end, Jake wasn't defending her anymore. He was planning his exit strategy. The legal process took months. Claire initially tried to fight the charges, claiming it was all a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But the evidence was overwhelming. Federal prosecutors built a case that included not just my situation, but Uncle Tom's identity theft, discrepancies in Jake's accounts, and the missing jewelry. They even found evidence she'd been planning to target other family members, including my elderly aunt who'd recently inherited money from her late husband. The trial itself was surreal. Sitting in a federal courthouse, watching prosecutors present evidence I'd helped gather, seeing Claire in an orange jumpsuit instead of her usual designer clothes. She'd maintained her innocent act for a while, crying on the stand about how she was just trying to help family, how I'd always been jealous of her, how this was a witch hunt. But the prosecution tore her story apart piece by piece. The video evidence, the financial records, the testimony from other family members she'd victimized. The verdict came back guilty on multiple counts. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised release, and ordered her to pay restitution to all her victims. 4 years doesn't sound like much for ruining multiple lives, but federal prison isn't county jail. She'd serve every day of that sentence. Ashley, Claire's daughter, stopped speaking to me after the trial. She blamed me for destroying her family and taking away her mother. I understood her anger, even if I didn't agree with it. She'd grown up with Claire's version of reality, where mom was always the victim, always being persecuted by jealous relatives. Unlearning that would take time. Maybe it would never happen. Some relationships don't survive the truth. But Jake and I grew closer. He filed for divorce while Claire was awaiting trial, got full custody of their younger son, and started rebuilding his life. He apologized 100 times for not seeing what Claire was doing, for not protecting family members from her. I told him what I'll tell anyone listening to this story. You can't blame yourself for believing someone you love. Manipulators are experts at exploiting trust. That's what makes them dangerous. My parents struggled with guilt. They felt they should have noticed, should have protected their family better. But I reminded them that Claire had been operating for years, carefully covering her tracks, choosing victims strategically. She'd fooled everyone. The difference was that I'd had the resources, the knowledge, and the sheer stubborn determination to expose her. The money I'd moved to safety went toward my wedding to Marcus, exactly as planned. We got married 8 months after Claire's sentencing in a small ceremony with family members who actually respected boundaries and the law. Jake walked me down the aisle alongside my father. Ashley didn't attend, but she sent a card months later. Not an apology, but an acknowledgement that maybe things weren't as simple as she'd believed.
It was a start.
Looking back, people ask if I regret how I handled it. If I should have confronted Claire privately, given her a chance to return the money, handled it as a family matter like my parents originally wanted. And my answer is always the same: absolutely not. Because private confrontations don't work with criminals. They just give them time to hide evidence, craft better lies, or target someone else. Public exposure and legal consequences were the only way to stop her pattern of behavior and protect other potential victims. The whole experience taught me something crucial about family, loyalty, and justice. Family isn't an excuse for criminal behavior. Loyalty doesn't mean protecting people who hurt you. And sometimes love means holding people accountable, even when it's hard, even when it tears relationships apart, even when it makes you the villain in someone else's story. Claire will be released eventually. She'll serve her time, complete her probation, and presumably rebuild some version of a life. I don't know what that will look like. I don't know if she'll genuinely change or just get better at hiding her behavior. But I do know that she won't target my family again. And every other potential victim who might have crossed her path is a little bit safer because I refuse to stay silent. Would I do it all again? In a heartbeat. Because protecting yourself isn't selfish. Demanding justice isn't vindictive. And refusing to be a victim isn't revenge. It's survival. The moment Claire waved those papers in my parents' living room, she thought she'd won. She thought she'd backed me into a corner where I'd have to accept her theft or look like the bad guy for fighting back. She thought wrong. And that one phone call changed everything.